You didn't have to come, Emmett. No one would have noticed. Emmett Calloway looked down at his worn leather gloves, still stained faintly with soil and rose thorns, then back up at the grand iron gates of the Whitmore estate. He held 3 modest bouquets wrapped in brown paper and twine, garden roses, baby's breath, and a single stem of lavender for peace. Nothing elaborate, nothing expensive. That's exactly why I came, he said quietly. Emmett ran a small flower shop on the corner of Birchwood and Elm, the kind of shop that smelled like rain and honeysuckle and barely turned a profit. At 33 he had learned to measure wealth in different units, not in dollars, but in the way a grieving widow's eyes softened when he handed her white carnations, in the way a nervous teenager stood straighter, holding sunflowers for his mother. He had been hired by the Whitmore family 3 months earlier to provide centerpieces for their daughter's wedding. A modest contract, a forgotten contract as it turned out. The call came 2 days before the ceremony, from a junior assistant, apologetic and rushed. Mr. Calloway, we've gone with a larger vendor. We're so sorry for the inconvenience. He had already ordered the flowers, already stayed up 2 nights arranging them. He swallowed the loss quietly, the way he had swallowed so many losses in his life, and said only, "I understand. Congratulations to the family." But the flowers were already blooming, and Emmett Calloway could not let them die in the back of his van. The wedding was held at the Whitmore estate, a place that made ordinary people feel like footnotes. Gerald Whitmore, 62, had built his real estate empire through decades of calculated decisions and cold negotiation. He had few friends and no patience for sentiment. His daughter Lily was 25, bright-eyed and deeply in love with a man named Preston Vale. Preston Vale was 33, handsome and hungry in ways that had nothing to do with food. He had pursued Lily for 2 years with surgical precision. Gerald had noticed the hunger, the way Preston's eyes moved around a room, cataloging its value. But Lily was radiant when she looked at Preston, and Gerald had learned, sometimes too late, that love doesn't consult spreadsheets. The wedding had cost more than most people earned in a decade. And yet when Emmett arrived at the side gate with his 3 simple bouquets, something stopped Gerald Whitmore mid-conversation. He had stepped away from the noise of the reception tent, needing air, needing silence. He was standing near the garden path when he saw a man in a plain cotton shirt and pressed trousers, carrying flowers wrapped in brown paper, speaking gently to one of the security staff. "I'm not on the guest list," Emmett was saying. "I know that. I just wanted to deliver these. They were made for today. It didn't feel right to let them go to waste." Gerald watched. He said nothing. Something about the simplicity of it. No drama, no demand, just a man and his flowers, pulled at something old and buried in his chest. He walked over. "Who are you?" Gerald asked. Emmett turned, unsurprised, unhurried. "Emmett Calloway. I had the original flower contract. Got cancelled last minute. No hard feelings. I just didn't want these to go unappreciated." Gerald studied him. "You drove here, dressed up, for a family that dropped your contract." "The flowers were already ready," Emmett said simply. "And your daughter's getting married. That's worth something." Gerald let him in. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the absence of bitterness in Emmett's voice. Perhaps it was because Gerald himself had spent 40 years surrounded by people who only appeared when something was in it for them. And here was a man who appeared when there was nothing. Emmett placed 1 bouquet near the entrance, 1 beside the signing table, and 1, the lavender stem tucked carefully among garden roses, on a small memorial table near the garden, where a framed photograph of Lily's late mother, Eleanor, rested. It was this last gesture that broke something open in Gerald Whitmore. He stood very still for a long moment. "How did you know about that table?" he asked, voice low. "I didn't," Emmett said. "Lavender just felt right for a quiet corner." During the reception, Gerald sat beside Emmett at a small side table. not by any formal arrangement, but because Gerald chose to. They talked slowly, the way men do when they've both known loss and learned not to rush through quiet moments. Emmett spoke of his late father, who had taught him to grow roses, of the shop he'd inherited at 28, already in debt, of the years of learning that kindness wasn't weakness, it was in fact the only currency that compounded. Gerald listened, really listened. And then something occurred to him, a thought sharp and uncomfortable. He had noticed, that afternoon, Preston Vale speaking quietly on his phone in the hallway during the ceremony. Gerald had caught fragments. The Birchwood parcel, once it's signed over. He hadn't understood it then. Now, slowly, the shape of it was becoming clearer. He said nothing to Emmett about this, but that night, after the guests had thinned and the lights were soft and golden, Gerald made 2 phone calls. The first was to his attorney. The second was to a colleague who knew Preston Vale from a previous business venture. What he learned, quietly and without fuss, confirmed what his gut had been whispering for months. Preston had structured the relationship carefully. The wedding, the timing, the assets that would legally shift with marriage. Lily was not the goal. Lily's inheritance was. Gerald sat with this knowledge for a long time. He did not act in anger. He acted in love. He spoke to Lily privately, gently, over the following days, not telling her what to feel, but sharing what he had found and asking her to look. Really look. Lily, who was bright and strong and had her mother's eyes, looked. 6 weeks later, the wedding was quietly annulled. Lily cried. Then she stopped crying. Then she began, slowly, to rebuild. Gerald, for the first time in years, felt something that wasn't control. It was presence. He had been present for his daughter in the only way that mattered. And Emmett Calloway? Gerald sent him a letter, 1 page, no formalities. You brought flowers to a family that owed you nothing. Because of that, I paid closer attention that day than I had in years. Thank you. 3 months later, the Whitmore estate hosted its annual charity gala. The floral arrangements, all of them, came from a small shop on the corner of Birchwood and Elm. When Emmett arrived to set up, Gerald met him at the door. You didn't have to come yourself, Gerald said, echoing without knowing it, the very words spoken months before. Emmett smiled. That's exactly why I came. Gerald looked at him for a moment, something softening in his face that had been rigid for a very long time. Come in, he said. There are people inside worth knowing. Kindness rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly, carrying flowers, asking nothing in return, and somehow it changes everything. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.